The other top story tonight, a verdict in one of the highest profile police shootings in the nation. Guilty. You can see it right here, blared across the front page of the Chicago Tribune's evening edition, I should say. The officer convicted there, Jason Van Dyke, second-degree murder and 16 counts of aggravated battery, one for each shot of Van Dyke fired at McDonald in that 2014 shooting. Now, this was caught on police dash cam video. City officials caught it, thought to keep it secret, and today shows why. The jury used this video that you're watching to determine, in their view, that this was a murder by police. McDonald running down the street, seeming to move away from officers and posing no lethal threat to them, only to be executed with 16 shots. That part the jury saw, but we can't show you. This video has sparked outrage, protests, the ousting of Chicago's police chief, and then the first murder charges for a Chicago officer in 3 decades. Today, the jury completed a process of convicting on those charges.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Jason Van Dyke, guilty of second-degree murder. We, the jury, find the defendant, Jason Van Dyke, guilty of aggravated battery with a firearm, first shot. We, the jury, find the defendant, Jason Van Dyke, guilty of aggravated battery with a firearm, second shot. We, the jury, find the defendant, Jason Van Dyke, guilty of aggravated battery with a firearm, 16 shots.
What you see there is the first murder conviction of a Chicago police officer in over 40 years. Van Dyke could spend decades behind bars, plus the time for aggravated battery. Now, moments ago, McDonald's family and supporters responded.
It gave us justice of which we seek, and it also set a precedent across this country that now people can look to Chicago and they can come here and learn what was done to bring us to this moment, and then they can begin to practice that in their towns and cities and bring justice for themselves. The real crime here is not just the death and the 16 shots of Laquan. The real crime is the cover-up.
That is what some of this change looks like. Chicago's mayor and police leadership have been urging calm and accepting any verdict. But there's other things that are not changing, and I want to note this before I go to our experts. A disturbing and seemingly lawless statement from the union that represents police officers in Chicago tonight. And this really offers us a window into the sometimes open resistance of some police officers in following the rule of law, whether you agree with the outcome or not. The police union challenging the legitimacy of the jury system and this verdict tonight by saying, quote, 12 ordinary citizens were duped into saving the asses of self-serving politicians. I'm joined now by Rashad Robinson, Executive Director of Color of Change, the nation's largest racial justice organization online, which has worked on these issues, and from Chicago, Jared Adams, an attorney for civil rights cases. He went to law school only after serving over 9 years for a wrongful conviction that was ultimately overturned. Thanks to both of you on a story that is significant across the nation. Rashad, this, everyone can understand watching right now, is different than how these stories usually start and end. Why?
Incredibly different. And I really do believe it starts with the folks on the ground in Chicago, organizations that really took this moment to build a movement, and a movement that not only went after the police department, but held the enablers accountable across the board. My organization, Color of Change, got very involved with local groups to oust Anita Alvarez, the former state attorney, who was part of the cover-up, made demands on Rahm Emanuel and others. Folks were relentless, and actually there's a new state attorney in office right now that's a direct result of the movement.
So this is a jury verdict, which means it's citizens reaching the conclusion, but you're making a structural point here that if people had not changed, the prosecutors and the leadership in the city, you might have never gotten it to a jury.
If the leadership of the city was not nervous about what was happening and people's interest in truly holding not only the police department accountable, but those who stood in the way of true justice accountable, we would not see this result. It's a direct result of organizing, of mobilizing, and in this moment where we're seeing so much news which can make us afraid and fearful about what the potential of our country is, understanding that organized communities, oppressed people rising up, resisting, but also putting forward a true vision about what they want and who they want in office can win the day. And I think that what's happened in Chicago and the movement that is set across the country, where now we have a national movement of electing reform-minded prosecutors around the country in places like Philadelphia and Orlando, and most recently in kicking out Bob McCullough, the 27-year incumbent who did not prosecute, in Ferguson, who did not prosecute Darren Wilson, who killed Mike Brown. And so this is a movement, and really that first spark really did happen with the leadership in Chicago ignoring that video, suppressing that video.
Jarrett, you're in Chicago, you know Chicago, you also know your way around the criminal justice system. As a defendant, as a former inmate, your conviction overturned rather dramatically. You went on to law school, now you represent others. When you look at this case, does it give you hope? Does it feel like the system that you've been inside is changing?
You know, quite frankly, well, first let me start off by extending my condolences to the family, and I am praying that they will begin to start to heal from this process. You know, I'll say this, Ari, I am, you know, born and raised on the south side of Chicago. I left, you know, Chicago, started my practice in New York, but I am often in Chicago. My mother still stays in Chicago, and so I am very much involved with everything Chicago, and my heart was in my throat as I'm sitting here in Chicago and awaiting that verdict. And, you know, there was a community outcry that brought this on, but I must acknowledge that there were two reporters who started this and uncovered the video that it took 13 months to be released. So while we should be, you know, happy that there is justice, we can't really cheer as if the problems are over, because you mentioned it earlier. The police union came out right away with a statement that continues to further the gap of the community and the police.
Does that give you chills? I mean, I think about it as an attorney. You don't really want the police smack-talking jury verdicts like they can just disagree with that. We have to all accept, in a nation that's a rule of law, these outcomes, whichever way they go.
Well, Ari, listen, I pray to God that the police spokesman for the union who made that comment today doesn't speak on behalf of all the police, because if he does, we really have a big problem.
Rashad?
Yeah, I mean, I've sat across the table with, you know, the head of the head of the National Police Union, you know, in the White House with the former president, where I've watched them say that, you know, all this talk about racial profiling was new to them. The police union is an incredible problem for anyone that seeks justice, because they continue to not even want to move a little bit on what's actually happening in this country and in these communities. What I will say, though, also is, you know, what this speaks to is justice and progress is not a straight line. We will continue to see moments around this country where justice isn't served, where video comes out and juries return verdicts that seem crazy for many of us who watch these things. But what I do think we can learn from what happened in Chicago is that if we continue to organize and fight, if we move our protest to the ballot box, and if we continue to hold those in office accountable, we can start building the power necessary to change both the written and unwritten rules that far too often make Black lives not matter, and allow police officers to believe that they are above the law. That has to change in a democracy and in a country that needs to really atone for all of the ways in which Black communities are treated like enemy combatants in their own neighborhoods.
Well, and Rashad, the point you make, I think, dovetails with exactly what Jared is saying. There's nothing to celebrate when you're dealing with a tragedy, but if the system works better, it's cops and judges and lawyers who will tell you then there's preventive action. And so if there's justice and accountability, then hopefully there are in the future far fewer unnecessary shootings. That's what the jury effectively found here. This was more than unnecessary. It was second-degree murder. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.